About 5 minutes late already. Oops, 10 minutes. Thank you. Thanks all. Thank you very much for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, the topic of discussion for this morning is actually quite critical to India. It's the role of centers of excellence. Basically, India has created a number of centers of excellence. And what we're going to try and discuss today is how to ensure that these centers of excellence don't remain islands of excellence. That what are the constraints to growth? Somebody's mobile phone. What are the constraints to a center of excellence spreading, having multiplier effects into the rest of the economy? What are the constraints in terms of infrastructure, in terms of bricks and mortar? And what are the constraints in terms of human capital, if any? And how does one get over those constraints? I remember walking around, like many of you have, I'm sure, the Infosys campus, which is the higher end of a center of excellence. And as you walk around, you wonder, when you look at the boundary wall, you say, does India start there? Because Infosys is something out of this world. So how do we look at this? Do we look at Infosys as a center of excellence that is an island in the traditional sense of bricks and mortar? Or do we look at the impact that Infosys had on the minds of the younger generation? Do we look at the non-conventional impacts of centers of excellence? They're not just pure old-fashioned Keynesian multiplier effects on the bricks and mortar of an economy. They affect the confidence of a nation. If Infosys can do it, a lot of young people say, we can do it. It's changed the mood of this country. The format today will be, we'll have 3 minutes each, introductory remarks, then we'll have a short discussion, and then we will take lots of questions from the floor. So if you've got a question, please raise your hand and grab hold of a mic, and we'll come to you. So let's start right away with Brutto on the left, and we'll just go systematically. Quick introduction, please.
My name is Dan Brutto. Been an employee with United Parcel Service for over 32 years, and I'm in charge of UPS International. We view certainly India as an emerging opportunity for us as a company, but certainly understand, and having been here the last week and a half, the many challenges that are involved in doing business in India, primarily moving goods freely within the country of India, as well as freely from other countries. And certainly look forward to this panel and talking about some of the things that at least we see from our experiences around the world that we think we can bring to the country of India to help goods move freer. And not only the goods, because in our business, goods and information and the flow of financials are equally as important. So I think India's done a good job in the communications industry as far as technology. But when we move goods from country to country, it's very important that they move freely, and we have good interaction from a technology standpoint with the customs. And the customers who utilize our services want to know where their packages and shipments are at any point in the supply chain, with the ability to change different modes of transportation to either speed up, most times speed up their products into the marketplace. So certainly we look forward to working with India and provide our services and our expertise to help the country of India become a major player in the world in the area of supply chain, moving goods freely in and out of India, and as well within the country of India.
Dan Brutto, are you saying that a constraint to a center of excellence becoming widespread is the infrastructure in India? Is that
Yes, certainly that is a big constraint.
So that's to be addressed.
Yes.
Okay. Moving on to Stephen Rohleder, we have 4 Americans on this panel, but actually Rohleder, I don't know whether you can call him an American because he's got more employees in India than in America, right? 35,000.
Right. I'm Chief Operating Officer for Accenture, and we were talking earlier, and I was pointing out that we have just over 35,000 employees in India, more than we have in the United States. So obviously building on the centers of excellence that we have established here in India is very important to us. I think to begin with, you really have to start with some context about the next evolution of globalization. When we talk about future centers of excellence, no longer are centers of excellence just located in the United States or Europe or Japan. And I think that what we've seen in the last 5 or 6 years, and certainly with Accenture and our evolution, is the movement and focus of establishing very rapidly growing centers of excellence in multiple centers around the world, and specifically in India. And I think as you look at how those centers are established, there's really 4 or 5 key components that seem to be common to success. First of all is the establishment of human capital and the ability to be able to have an educated base of human capital, if you will, to help staff and grow the center of excellence. Second one is infrastructure. We talked a little bit. I'm sure we're going to talk about it a little bit more, but having established infrastructure that you can rely on. Third is public policy, and more importantly, stable public policy. As companies look to locate centers of excellence and to grow centers of excellence within India, that's going to become more and more prevalent in the evaluation criteria. Fourth is an entrepreneurial spirit. I don't think that's ever been a question in India. I think that is just a part of the culture and a very strong part of the culture, but it's also an important factor as companies look to locate their centers of excellence. And then fifth is the ability to secure and sustain financial capital, because that is the lifeblood of expansion. And your ability to have access to financial capital is one of the key components to establishing those future centers of excellence. So,
thank you very much. Ruiz, who's Chairman and CEO of AMD.
I don't think that's my phone. Well, we'll just have to speak over it. You know, one of the things, and I'm going to repeat some of the things you've heard because it's important. I believe that some of the ingredients that are critical for centers of excellence is the human capital you heard about. That means an educated workforce that is that thinks, that learns to think. And I think Indian universities and Indian workforce has definitely shown and demonstrated that they're up there with the best. The second piece is, of course, the opportunity created for them to find and pursue an excellence in some area. And this is where I believe it's sort of important when we look back at the centers of excellence that have been created around the world. For example, the internet as a business model, the center of excellence for that is definitely being Silicon Valley. When we look at things as, you know, really creative, innovative automotive electronics, most people would immediately think of Germany as a place where that has occurred. Fashion center of excellence, Italy. You know, wireless communications, who would have ever thought that it would be in Finland, but it is in Finland with Nokia. So you look back and look at that, and it's a little bit like a dating service in the following sense, is that you sort of, it's like falling in love. You never really know how many things you're going to have to try before you conclude that this is something that might be appealing to the market in India, to the employees in India, to the population in India. And then the role of government is to provide the infrastructure necessary for that to flourish. And I think when you look at it that way, to me, the most significant obstacles today to allow centers of excellence to flourish more than they have already in India is the infrastructure piece and access to capital. And I think if we could find a way to improve in that, the tremendous potential of creative centers of excellence here is just phenomenal. Last week I was in Hyderabad visiting some people, and I learned that they're really looking at stem cell research and nanotechnology. Fantastic areas to look into because there is no centers of excellence in the world yet for that. And the human capital is here, the desire of these people to go after is there. Now, if we could somehow surround them with the infrastructure and access to capital, possibility of that occurring here is very high.
Right.
I'm Muhtar Kent, Chief Operating Officer of the Coca-Cola Company. We, of course, regard India as a very, very important market, not just for its size and for what it represents in terms of the size of our business and the potential for it to grow, but also in terms of really India providing leaders for our business around the world. The human capital side, a number of our businesses around the world are led by Indian leaders, not just in India, but also other businesses, important businesses for us around the world, like our business in Great Britain or our business in the Philippines, etc. And we really do appreciate and believe that that is going to be, again, a very important factor for us going forward. Also, we do have a large business here. The Coca-Cola system in India employs about 150,000 people in total, and it's growing very rapidly. And India is, the way it is developing rapidly, is going to, we'll see the food industry at large and the beverage industry at large developing very fast in India because of the growth in incomes, but also in the urbanization and the changes of lifestyles will mean that it is a country where packaged beverages are going to be demanded. India has had great success in certain centers of excellence, as was repeated, like information technology, software development. Entertainment is another. Entertainment industry, again, is one, and telecommunications. But the challenge as we move to seeing if India can develop new centers of excellence is going to be really infrastructure. Because I think the potential is in areas like retail, areas like healthcare, areas like tourism. India has tremendous potential. But the key is, again, infrastructure, and will infrastructure develop rapidly enough to allow those new centers of excellence? Just want to just say a few more sentences on the food industry. India's food industry is about $200 billion today. Will develop to over $300 billion in a few years by 2012. And 40% of all food produced in India perishes because it can't get to the market fast enough. And the potential here is 40%. 40%. And the key here is not just agriculture, but how can India add value to its agriculture? And I want to highlight an area which is basically, and India has been a leader in the world spice market, but how can you add value to it? The way India would add value to its spices, to its food, is really areas like flavorings for the cosmetic industry and essentially for the food industry, additives and components for cosmetic industry, which is growing rapidly in the world, as well as flavorings for the food industry and beverage industry at large. And I think we see that as a tremendous area in India for future development. And retailing is another area where, just to give you one example, we are setting up a school for retailing to improve just retailing, not for large retailers only, but also for the small retailers. And again, to get over the challenge of infrastructure, what we've done is we're going to be setting up a mobile school system where mobile trucks can go around the country training retailers to become better retailers for the future of India. So, and we'll get back to the discussion again. Thank you.
So you're focusing on the human capital aspect.
Absolutely, very important.
Nandan?
I think we have been successful in creating centers of excellence in areas where human capital and services is a predominant model. I think because we have a very large pool of high-quality English-speaking human capital, we have clearly a lot of entrepreneurial energy and entrepreneurs in the system. And by and large, public policy towards human capital is either positive or benign. It's not negative in some sense. And I think, and also the improvements and reforms in the financial markets over the last 20 years has enabled entrepreneurs to access capital very easily in the capital markets. So I think that's the reason why human capital has become the dominant model of Center of Excellence. And if you look at Bangalore, I think, apart from Accenture and Infosys, the many companies, IBM has a large presence. GE has probably one of the world's largest R&D bases there working on advanced technology. It's the center for VLSI design. So clearly, that center of excellence has happened because the human capital is there, the institutions are there, the weather is good, all the things you need to create that environment. But I think as you start looking at the other side of the excellence issue, it's really about moving, as I think he mentioned, moving goods in and out. So it's about physical movement. And it's about moving people in and out. Industries like tourism is really about moving people in and out. And that's when I think we have the challenges, because that side of the equation is not as well developed as the human capital side of the equation. And I think I would actually characterize this as three separate problems, because I think one of them is clearly infrastructure, whether it's roads, airports, highways, ports, and so on and so forth.
You mean bricks and mortar type?
Yeah, but I think, the second thing is clearly urbanization, because for a variety of reasons, we have neglected urbanization. In fact, the 1951 census report talks about cities as accidents of history and geography. They didn't want to acknowledge the existence of cities. So clearly, urbanization is the second one, because urbanization requires that concentration of people, both from an economic point of view as well as centers of innovation. You need people around to create the ecosystem. And the third thing which is related is really India as a single market. And again, for a variety of reasons which I won't go into here, India became a fragmented economic market. For example, you can't ship sugarcane from one state to another state, or you can't ship alcohol from one state to another state, or you have this whole welter of taxation, central excise, state tax, this tax, all that. And that made India into a very fragmented market, which made interstate movement of goods very difficult. And therefore, I think the things like the GST and all that are very important to create a single market. So I guess to really create centers of excellence in non-human capital industries, a combination of infrastructure, urbanization, and single market is critical to make it happen.
Right. I don't want this to become just a discussion on infrastructure, but it seems to be most people's view that bricks and mortar infrastructure is crucial for the spread of center of excellence to the rest of the economy, to have a multiplier effect. For that to happen, do we have to only rely on the government, or are there other ways of improving infrastructure?
I don't think you have to solely rely on government. Frankly, I think that private industry plays a critical role in making sure that that infrastructure is built up. I think if we wait for public policy to drive all of the improvements that we expect and need, India will fall short and fall behind in terms of growth. I think that the private companies and private investment will play a vital role in solving the infrastructure challenge we have right now.
But I would like to ask somebody from India a question. It's Nandan, I was visiting your facility about 2 years ago, and you're right, it's out of this world. I mean, you feel like you're on another planet. It's phenomenal, great. But I remember your management team frustrated because to get to the facility was damn difficult.
Sure, that's I think that's the issue, that in the early days of the human capital industry, the physical infrastructure was not a constraint because the number of people employed was less. But now with millions of people being employed, we are hitting up against the physical infrastructure challenges, not because we have to move goods, but because we have to move a large number of people. And definitely, the quality of our roads and urban infrastructure is an impediment. For example, one of the big challenges we have in Bangalore is that the new international airport is supposed to be switched on time on March 28, 2008. There's only one issue, is how do you get to the airport and back? So we are now, we feel we may have to go the previous night and maybe, check in a hotel because it's going to take 3-4 hours just to go from our office to the airport. So I think this is the classic, infrastructural bottlenecks that are now hurting the human capital industry also.
But to his question of, should the government be the only one, do you think you had to do something to change that?
No, I think certainly the capital can come from the private sector. For example, today there's in Bangalore there's a elevated road being built from for about 15 kilometers, and that's being built by private capital. But the policy framework, which allows private capital to enter, the regulatory framework, unless that's in place, private capital will not invest in that area.
Actually, before you just start, I'll just take up and ask you a question on that. The big change in India, we are trying to, we often refer to India's failure of governance in a democratic system. But the big change is in the last 20 years compared to the first 40 years since our independence, voters are becoming very aggressive. And what they want now is just 3 or 4 things. Bijli, sadak, pani. They want roads, electricity, and water. They want infrastructure. So if you want to be voted back, you've got to deliver infrastructure. And for the first time now, I've heard politicians want private sector contractors who deliver. In the old days, they'd pay them and get a bit under the table and didn't matter what happened. But now they want people who deliver. So can democracy, finally, an aggressive democracy, compared to a passive democracy earlier, ensure that politicians deliver on infrastructure?
I think there's been countries that have shown that there's some creative ways to compress the gap. And I think the gap in India is growing. There's no question. While some areas have really excelled, as we've talked, the gap in terms of the infrastructure, and usually infrastructure should be ahead of that so that it can facilitate some areas of growth in certain other areas that we talked about, like tourism, like retailing, and like healthcare and so forth. But one example I want to give is build, operate, and transfer projects. But it seems that there's been no examples, successful examples of that really taking place. And I think one of the areas where that can really help infrastructure develop, whether it's roads or whether it's highways or whether it's sewage systems or power. Power is one of the biggest challenges of the country, of course, is those BOT projects. But it seems what is happening in India, and one of the impediments is that the dichotomy between the central government, which is very progressive, and some of the local governments has to be really solved. And I think this is one of the biggest challenges in how to ensure that they can both look upon the same objectives, aligned objectives, and get some of these projects moving. Because we all know infrastructure takes time. You can't just build highways in a week.
Right. Dan, if I can ask you, when you look at India and you see infrastructure not developing, and therefore centers of excellence, I want to get back to that, not spreading, do you think, God, India's not handling the easy part? The tough part is human capital and having a population that is entrepreneurial. That's the difficult part. The easy part should be just building infrastructure. Other countries have shown it. Does that surprise you that we can't handle the easy part?
Well, I would draw an analogy between what the EU did for Europe. Back when we were in Europe in, say, the late 80s, it was very, very difficult to move any package between, let's say, Belgium and France or between Germany and Austria. And I think they realized that they were not going to be competitive in the world market unless they broke the borders down and they freely allowed goods to move across different countries without restrictions of stopping at the border, a very cumbersome customs process, a taxation process, a licensing process for the vehicles. And in my view of India, it's not that there's not enough vehicles on the road, because there's certainly enough trucks, I think, to move the goods to market. It's just the impediment that it takes to move goods freely within the country of India.
Right.
So I think
Nandan,
you have to attack that first.
That's an important point. Like Europe, you can drive across borders. Here you can't drive across states. Why can't we just solve a simple problem like that? Octroi and taxation, which you referred to.
No, I'll have to give a 1-hour lecture on why it's not that simple. But I think, fundamentally, what happened was that when the economy didn't really have surplus taxes, the states were given powers to tax, which were required for them to raise money. For example, there's something called the central sales tax, which is a tax on exports. In other words, when stuff is going from one state to another state, you pay a tax to take it out. It's not a great incentive for single markets. And this happened because the states didn't have money and they had to be given taxation powers. But actually, if you look at the reforms happening in the taxation system in India, it's pretty impressive, because on the indirect taxes, we have this whole SENVAT, MODVAT, which started in the 90s. And on the other side, we have this VAT, which has now come in, and the GST, which is coming in 3 years. If that reform process is completed, which I think it will be because all indications are it will, I think you will have the most significant tax reforms that you need to drive a single market. So I think we are about 2-3 years away from that kind of environment.
Just back to your question on whether the human capital was low-hanging fruit, if you will, and I would suggest that India has conquered probably the most challenging component of the 5 aspects I talked about, because you can look at examples today of emerging countries that are developing, that are competing, trying to compete with India in terms of location of centers of excellence. And the first thing, the number one thing on their agenda is the human capital agenda. If they can't get their education system in, if they can't produce qualified, educated personnel to fuel that growth, their growth doesn't even start. So I think to a certain extent, India has tackled one of the more difficult items in terms of being able to grow and to fuel the establishment and expansion of centers of excellence.
Okay, I will be asking for questions in about 2 minutes, so please get hold of a microphone if you possibly can. If you put your hand up, mics will come to you. Last 2 questions. One is this question about the disparity, the gap. If you have centers of excellence, Nandan, does it mean that there's an increasing gap between the rich and the poor, or does it mean, yes, the gap is increasing, but the poor are also getting richer at a faster rate, that there's a trickle-down effect, that there's a pulling people up by the booster? The rate of change of poverty alleviation has been much higher in these 10% years of growth, but the disparity has increased. So.
Well, I think specifically on centers of excellence, I think the most important thing they do really 2 or 3 things. One is they create visible signs of progress. And I think in any society, to give hope to people, you have to show visible signs of progress. The second thing, I think they serve as role models, as what can be done here. Because if you start giving role models from outside the country, people say, oh no, India is very difficult, we can't do it here. But if you do it here, then nobody can argue with you. So I think it serves that very positive thing. And I think the most important benefit, which people tend to sort of ignore in this whole economic reforms, not benefiting the poor, is that for the first time, we have tax revenues of an order of magnitude higher than ever before. And that's what is paying for your social programs. The fact that you're able to increase your taxes by $25 billion a year, consecutively, increase, mind you, gives you the money to pay for all the health and education. So I think this link is often ignored, that economic reforms is giving us the cash to get the development and infrastructure right.
Hector, Ruiz, one last question before we open it up. India's strength is human capital, services, developing areas in telecommunication, and weaknesses is in bricks and mortar. Should we just focus on our strengths and just look at software and look at the softer side of development and forget about that, focus on your strengths, or does one have to look at the entire gamut of things?
Well, I do think it's very wise to build on the strengths of the country, and human capital is way on the list of strengths. So building on that, I think, is very appropriate. And the comments that I made earlier when I met people in Hyderabad about the fact they're thinking of creating a center of excellence around stem cell research and nanotechnology, which are heavily influenced by human capital, it's a great idea. But at some point in time, one thing that's inevitable is the Indian market is huge. People-wise, it's a very large market. A consumption of goods and services will increase dramatically in the future. So in my view, that I think is inevitable that at some point in time, and probably not too far in the future, the investment on bricks and mortars that are required to be able to support such a large market will need to be made. And I think it wouldn't be at all inappropriate for for some level of focus and planning to occur now as we move down that path.
So if you had 100 rupees to spend, how much would you spend on software, human capital, how much on physical capital?
One thing I just want to add is that India's, of course, population is still growing. So the demand on infrastructure is not staying where it is.
Right.
So I cannot stress the importance of closing that gap that is widening every day. So I think it is absolutely imperative for India to focus on infrastructure.
Nandan, you
whilst
didn't
not-
answer that widening gap.
It is absolutely imperative, I think.
No, I don't think we can solve the problem by software companies adding more people. I mean, they're going to hire a few million people at best. That's not going to solve the problem. I think it needs all the other things that we talked about. I'll give you a couple of examples. Today, Hampi, for example, is an extraordinary World Heritage site. It has, till recently, it had no airport and no hotels. It's amazing. It's one of the most beautiful places in India, but you can't get there. So, and if you're able to get there and get the stuff going, then you're going to create thousands of jobs locally. I was talking to a company which is the world's largest furniture company, and they were saying we want to make furniture in Delhi and get the brass fittings from Moradabad, but they couldn't do it because of interstate laws. And therefore, if they had done that, they would have created thousands of jobs in that area on brass fittings. So unless we fix all this, you're not going to create jobs across the country.
Right. Now for questions. Gentleman in the front here. Yes, sir.
I'm S.K. Bhalla, alumnus IIM Ahmedabad. Mr. Chairman, when we talk of centers of excellence and human capital, to my mind, one of the sectors which have been somewhat neglected has been the education sector, particularly the higher education. We just celebrated 60 years of India's independence, and barring the IITs and the IIMs and maybe the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, I cannot think of any Indian university which can be compared to even a grade B American university. So some attention has to be made for this education sector.
But the students are better, right?
Sorry?
The students are better.
Yeah.
The gentleman there, yes, sir. Oh, you don't have a mic?
My name's Thomas Harris with Standard Chartered Bank. The emergence of global centers of excellence, you need, I would suggest, a positive attitude towards the process of globalization. And one of the things that surprised me is that none of the panelists have referred to the problems in India of elements of public opinion and politics which are opposing the process of globalization, and with it the possibility of emergence of centers of excellence. Coca-Cola has faced terrific opposition from NGOs to some of your activities. I'm surprised Mr. Kent has mentioned this. The express delivery industry currently has draft legislation out there which, if ever implemented, would severely restrict your abilities to operate. The lawyers, the accountants, the banks all face restrictions on their ability to invest here or to practice their business here. So my question is to the panel, it's all very well talking about the infrastructure, the hard infrastructure, but what about the soft side? That is the attitudes. What are the political problems that you each face as you try to grow, particularly, of course, this is addressed to the American members of the panel. What about these political challenges that you face as multinationals trying to operate in a country which is currently not prepared to allow Walmart or Carrefour to open up stores?
I think that's, I did refer a little bit to the dichotomy between the central government and the progressive central government and the local government attitudes. So I did touch on it, but you're right, we didn't go specifically into it. I think it's a good point. We do, however, see attitudes shifting rapidly, positively. We do see that. We do see that particularly when companies face those kind of issues, that the central government is more and more trying to take a much more positive attitude. But again, the biggest challenge, I believe, is not the lack of infrastructure, but why that takes place. And that is, again, this contradictory views between local governments that are very different from state to state, and the central government, and therefore the impediments that is causing to the positive flow of goods and services through the lack of infrastructure development. Many times, I just heard yesterday of a project where a 200-kilometer highway was approved. The bid was done, The company a company outside of India, together with an Indian partner, won the bid, and it's been 4 years, and there's been absolutely no development because one local government has stopped the permits. Example.
Right. Stephen, one of the issues is that with this restrictive regime and in many areas, it's a negative, but some see a positive in it. Like, as soon as there's liberalization, there's potential for growth in it. For example, telecom. For years, you had a restrictive government sector. It was totally private, was not allowed into telecom. As soon as they allowed it to grow, you saw phenomenal growth.
Right.
So in the restrictions, do you see potential for growth?
I think you do. I think you also see flashes of change that give you pause for positive reinforcement. Transportation, I do think that there'll be some liberalization of transportation, liberalization of banking. I think if you see movement in those areas, that's a positive thing in terms of public policy. When I gave you my opening comments, I talked about the importance of stability in public policy, and that's what we look at as you look at this next wave of globalization. What countries have a stable public policy that is going to enhance foreign direct investment and is going to allow you to do business and grow a business much more aggressively? I think India now is at a point in their journey of change that they have to look at how policy is going to impact the investment that foreign national companies make in India, because it is becoming restrictive. It is becoming, it is at a point that it inhibits the growth of centers of excellence to other segments of the industrial economy of India. And I think if we're not careful here, we'll see a restriction or a contraction of GDP as a result of that.
Nandan, is this, they say all our bureaucrats are children of socialists, and they are socialists in the instincts almost. They've got socialism in their DNA, or is that changing?
Well, that changed. I think that changed when their children started joining investment banks. So they understood the benefits of globalization. So I think, no, I think frankly, there are, of course, fringe elements both on the NGO side as well as in the political system. But I think the broad buy-in for globalization is accepted in India. And while there will be specific, I think it's old-fashioned protectionism. I don't think it's some anti-globalization. I think people don't want competition like everywhere else, and they're trying to block it. So I think I don't see this as a restraining factor. I think as Steve mentioned, the important thing is the combination of human capital, entrepreneurs, and financial markets has actually created the instruments by which you can go from a cozy oligopoly to a fiercely contested market in a matter of months. And we have seen that happening in airlines, in telecom. It'll happen tomorrow in retail. It'll happen in media. So I think that people haven't understood the full consequences of that fast-forward behavior of markets that we have today. And I think that will drive the other sectors too shortly.
So in answer to his question, Nandan, would you say that if you're an entrepreneur in India, successful, you can be successful anywhere in the world? Because what you have to go through here
well, I mean, that may be patting ourselves on the back a little too much, because I think there are other attributes to entrepreneurship than circumventing the system. Right. But I think certainly learning how to deal with the competitive environment here is definitely a good way to learn to deal with global environments.
Right. Yes, sir.
I don't see a restriction. Certainly, from an India perspective, I think the supply continues to be there for us. What I see, though, is a more of a global competitive influence that will impact our expansion in India. I mean, you have countries you know, everyone talks about the BRIC countries and the development of those countries in terms of their emergence. But there's another wave of countries, you know, that we talk about in this multipolar environment that are driving just as competitive human capital regimes as India. So if you look at Argentina, if you look at Vietnam, if you look at Eastern Europe, the challenge for the India human capital market isn't going to be the supply, I believe. It's going to be the competitiveness of those skills that are being developed and how they compete on a global stage with other emerging countries.
I agree. I don't see that it's going to be a bottleneck, and I see that something else happening, which is also going to be a very positive on India and India's development, and that is increasingly more and more business leaders, we will see them being Indian around the world because of just the fact that what we see in Indian management as a huge positive and benefit is very flexible, mobile, well-educated, but also understanding world cultures, and that really creates success. And we see that happening more and more, and I think then you're going to get also the influence factor. So all of those global leaders of business and industry captains that are going to be Indian more and more around the world are going to have a positive influence impact on India together with the Indian progressive companies that are led by Indian entrepreneurs. So I think there's going to be some kind of fusion that will benefit India tremendously over the next 10 years as we see that happening. And certainly, you know, I do believe that more and more you will see, as I said, then compared to today, Indian captains of industry and leaders around the world running global businesses or regional businesses compared to today.
Yeah, no, I think as Pranay mentioned, I think the hard stuff is done. I think the fact, some of them are accidents of history. English is an accident of history, but things like the entrepreneurial spirit, the democracy, the ability to celebrate diversity, far more sort of comfort with globalization, the fact that technology is now embedded in the Indian psyche, all these things I think are huge positives. And all the other problems we talked about are really solvable, because I think at the end of the day, it's easier to build a road than to build a democracy. So,
Hector Ruiz, you've got a lot of Indians working for you, I'm sure, and talking about the impact of democracy on the youngsters these days. They say democracy is in their DNA, they question everything, they are creative as a result. So finally, after the business community tends to criticize democracy, you know, it doesn't make quick decisions. But 60 years of democracy in the youngsters' DNA, do you think that's made Indians more creative, the young India?
Well, you know, it's so hard to generalize for 1.2 billion people. But, you know, we have close to 1,000 engineers here in India that we've dealt with. And you know, they're incredibly challenging in the sense is they don't accept things that don't make sense. And I think that is good for us. I think they challenge the status quo. They're very involved. And there's one thing that came out yesterday in a discussion, by the way, that I think is critical to recognize is the DNA of Indian leaders there was a question asked yesterday, you know, should Indian leaders become more combative and aggressive in this world? And I frankly think the answer is no. As a matter of fact, I think the Indian DNA of being more passive is a big plus now, because we're moving into a world that requires more relationships, more alliances, more partnerships, and we see now in our leaders, particularly here in India, a tremendous ability to partner across the many functions we have in the company, much more effectively than any other group that we have in the company.
Dan Brutto, in this argumentative Indian, this creative Indian, this unregulated Indian, is that difficult? Is it a problem in your area, or is it a plus?
I would say it's definitely a plus, and I think we are known as an operational engineering company that just happens to move packages and freight around the world. as those engineers get together, I think they will solve the problems of the inefficiencies within the country of India. Those inefficiencies, you just have to look at the fuel consumption of trucks, cars that are sitting in traffic. The amount of fuel that's used inefficiently is tremendous in this country. So I think the more intelligent people from India, the engineers, and working on operational engineering, a lot of the things that we do is try to get the most efficient routing of a package to and from a shipper to a customer. And certainly doing that in the market in India is difficult, but I believe with folks working very diligently together and trying to eliminate the waste, that will lead to better ways to utilize the infrastructure. And obviously, I think also I'll just end on the fact that once the local government officials see how infrastructure works outside of their particular area and how efficient that it can be, I think that will be the beginning of change. And I think as private industry, the greatest gift that we can give to these local democracies is to show them how efficient they potentially could be based on what is going on around the world. And in the event that they remain inefficient, they will actually hurt themselves in the long run. And that's certainly what we're going to strive to do.
We're coming to an end. There's about 5 minutes left, and I'd like a roundup, but one or two more questions.
My name is Harsh Manglek. I'm Chairman India for Accenture, and I've appreciated the thought-provoking remarks on this subject, but the definition of centers of excellence that we've been using seems rather restrictive, because most of the examples seem to be pointed at the top end of the pyramid, highly educated people, etc. Now, we've seen from discussions right through these sessions that the demographic pyramid is 2/3 of the people are in the rural areas. It's a very young population, so I'd be interested in the views of panel members on, is there another type of centers of influence, of excellence, that make it more relevant to the large part of the population and extend the reach and scaling, for example, rural healthcare, etc.
Actually, centers of influence is a good description. I'll just get everybody to round up with that question. One last question, and then we'll take a final round of your comments.
I think we came to a conclusion long back that the external system would not generate the kind of human capital in the numbers and quality that we wanted. So we invested in that. And today in Mysore, we have what we believe is probably the world's largest corporate university, where we can train 13,500 people at one time on a fully residential basis. So we have a throughput of about 40,000 people a year. So I think that's what many companies are doing in many industries. And I think that's just our way of addressing the inadequacies of the externalities that we have. I think answering the other question that Harsh raised, I think clearly it's not just about IT, software, biotechnology. I think it's about in all areas. And I think that's where the other things matter. I mean, if you want to make Murdabad a great center of brassware, which it is, but if you want to make it a global center, you need to make those people access global markets. Otherwise, who's going to buy that stuff? Similarly, if you're going to make Hampi a global center of tourism, you have to have access to people coming there. So I think if we address these other issues, then the natural center that we have, which are incipient, will flourish in the future.
Right. We have about 3 minutes left. So if we could have about a 30-second roundup each, please, your conclusions.
Certainly, I'll just give my comments on the last question. Touching the major part of the population in developing centers of excellence is going to have to get down to the manufacturing level and maybe the value-added services that most of the people are probably going to spend their lives doing. And the only way that that can happen successfully is the free movement of goods and services in between states within India And also, that will allow the market to open up for India to freely exchange goods with other countries around the world.
Yeah, I'll just end on a positive note, because I really think that the story of India has yet to be told. I think that that the tough stuff that we've talked about in terms of human capital and investment in education is really just the tip of the spear. And frankly, I think the next 10 to 20 years, while we live in an incredibly complex and competitive world, the next chapter in India's history will be written based on their ability to take a combination of public scrutiny, public policy, and progress in the infrastructure area and progress in the human capital and investment area, and merge that together to continue the growth potential that we've experienced here in the last 5 to 10 years.
I'm glad you raised that point of the 2/3 of the segmentation of the population, because I think there is a great opportunity to address the needs of that segment, whether it's healthcare or anything else, and have companies be able to create a center of excellence around creating technology and products and services that are useful, affordable, and accessible to that population. And what a better place to create those products, technology, and services than in places like India, where the people that are here really understand intimately the needs of that segment. So I really think that's a huge opportunity for a center of excellence.
I think India is really at a crossroads in terms of the next 10 to 15 years, and I believe that the biggest investment in India and also the expenditures by the Indian consumers are going to be in a few critical sectors, and therefore those sectors will also develop in terms of centers of excellence. And in my opinion, those are critically, of course, infrastructure projects, investment driven, a lot of it foreign investment driven, food processing, expenditures on food processing, packaged food is just going to, and processed food is just going to skyrocket in India. Tourism, healthcare, and retail. These are the areas which will drive the biggest investments as well as the biggest expenditures in India over the next 10 to 15 years, in my opinion.
No, I think there's no question that we're going to see a lot more centers of excellence coming up beyond what we historically, take them for granted in technology and so forth. And I think some of that has to do with public policy and public investment. But I think we are finding that as and when you open up new markets, we find suddenly a lot of young people coming in, and then you see a burst of innovation. So I see that happening in many, many sectors in the coming years.
Right, gentlemen, and everybody in the audience, thanks very much. I think you'll find it was a wonderful session. It was most illuminating. Going beyond the boundary walls of Infosys. Thanks a lot.